Derek Fulton believed he stood beyond the reach of ordinary law. But the day his quiet rebellion met an unshakable system, everything he thought he understood about freedom collapsed. Derek Fulton lived in a quiet neighborhood where most people followed routines without drawing attention. He stood out, not because of loud behavior or troublemaking, but because he carried himself with an unusual level of confidence, as if rules were optional in his world. He began calling himself a sovereign citizen, a term unfamiliar to most of the town. While others renewed their vehicle registration and paid local dues without question, Derek removed the license plates from his car and replaced them with a piece of cardboard marked with a homemade symbol. At first, people laughed it off, assuming it was just a quirky experiment or an attempt to go viral online. Neighbors saw him recording himself in the driveway, speaking into his phone about personal freedom and declaring that government authority held no power over him. As days passed, small but noticeable signs appeared that Derek was serious about his beliefs. Official letters from the city were left unopened on his porch. When a notice was placed on his door about property taxes, he took it down and filmed himself tearing it apart for an audience online. His videos slowly gained attention from people who supported his views, encouraging him to continue. Derek felt validated and began pushing further. He walked into municipal offices to challenge everyday procedures, insisting he was exempt from regulations that everyone else followed. The staff, unsure whether he was joking or making a serious statement, tried to reason with him, but he ignored every attempt at explanation. To Derek, each ignored rule felt like a personal victory. He believed he was proving a point, shaping himself into a symbol of resistance. However, under the surface, officials were taking notice. His name began appearing in internal reports, flagged as someone repeatedly refusing to comply with lawful procedures. He didn't know that each document he dismissed was being carefully recorded and filed. While he celebrated online, thinking he had outsmarted the system, those watching him from the legal side were building a different kind of record. Derek believed he was untouchable, that his declarations made him immune to consequence. What he didn't realize was that the quiet silence from authorities was not acceptance. It was preparation. Derek's actions began to escalate in subtle but steady ways. The foreclosed building at the edge of town became his new focus. Once a small administrative property, it had been shut down due to budget cuts. Derek saw it as an opportunity to make a statement. Without permission, he moved in and declared it his lawful territory, claiming that, because it was no longer in active use, he had a natural right to occupy it. He recorded every moment of his takeover, announcing to his growing online audience that he had reclaimed land from what he called a broken system. Curious supporters started visiting the site, treating it like a headquarters for their shared beliefs. People in the neighborhood began feeling uneasy. They noticed unfamiliar vehicles parked around the property at odd hours. Some of the visitors posted messages online praising Derek for standing against authority, while others encouraged more aggressive actions. Derek took their praise as encouragement to push his defiance even further. He stopped responding to any form of official communication, letting envelopes stack up on a small table near the entrance. Instead of engaging through legal channels, he doubled down on his personal narrative that he had already won by refusing to acknowledge the system altogether. Local officials kept their distance at first, monitoring the situation from a legal standpoint. Derek interpreted their lack of immediate intervention as proof that they could do nothing. He made more videos where he walked confidently through the building, pointing out how no one had stopped him. While his followers applauded, those within the town council reviewed property laws and previous notices connected to his name. Derek had unknowingly created a trail of linked incidents, each documented and filed. Officials remained patient, ensuring every step taken against him would follow proper procedure. For Derek, everything seemed to be going according to his plan. The more time passed without confrontation, the more convinced he became that his position was secure. To him, silence meant victory. But to those watching him from the legal side, silence meant everything was being carefully prepared. Derek saw only the surface: his videos, his followers, and the attention he had gained. He did not see the quiet meetings, the compiled evidence, or the steady movement toward a legal response that would not rely on argument but on structure, records, and law. Derek's confidence reached a new level when he decided to disrupt official processes beyond just property claims. He began filing multiple documents with local offices, each one filled with confusing language and repeated declarations that he was independent from all government authority. He believed that by overwhelming the system with paperwork, he could force officials to acknowledge his status. To him, it was a clever strategy. To the staff processing these forms, it was a deliberate attempt to derail normal operations. Each submission required time and review, taking attention away from genuine cases. Derek viewed the delays he caused as proof that the system was failing, not realizing that every document he submitted was being carefully archived as evidence. As his online influence grew, Derek started encouraging others to copy his actions. People from different towns began sending similar filings to their local offices, all referencing the same language Derek used. Small administrative departments, already limited in staff, were forced to deal with these unnecessary claims. Some towns flagged the pattern and traced the origin back to Derek's videos. Officials in multiple regions began to recognize his name as a key figure in a spreading disruption tactic. Derek was unaware that his actions had triggered cooperative communication between municipalities. While Derek continued posting updates celebrating what he believed was progress, investigators quietly compiled a timeline of his activities. They connected the unlawful occupation of the foreclosed property, the ignored tax notices, and now the interference with official operations. None of these actions appeared dramatic on their own, but together they painted a clear picture of a growing threat to public administration. Derek did not need to cause physical harm for his actions to be taken seriously. His misuse of legal channels was enough. Meanwhile, in the eyes of his followers, Derek was becoming a symbol. They saw him as someone standing firm while government agencies hesitated. Derek fed into this image, presenting himself as calm and unshaken in every video. What he didn't realize was that the lack of direct confrontation was intentional. Authorities were in no rush to argue with him in public or respond to his declarations on camera. They were waiting to act in a controlled and complete manner, ensuring that when the response came, it would not leave room for debate or spectacle. Derek believed he was controlling the narrative. In reality, a quiet countdown had already begun. The turning point arrived early one morning when official vehicles arrived at the foreclosed property. There were no sirens, no raised voices, and no dramatic scene. The officers present were calm and prepared, moving with quiet coordination. Derek expected confrontation and believed he could challenge their authority on camera. He set up his recording equipment ready to declare that they had no jurisdiction over him. But instead of engaging with his claims, the officials ignored his statements entirely. They followed their protocol step by step, presenting formal documents that confirmed the property seizure was legally approved and fully authorized. Derek attempted to interrupt, but none of his printed declarations or self-made certificates were acknowledged. Each officer had a clear role, and every action was logged. They did not argue or attempt to convince him. Their silence created an unexpected pressure Derek had not anticipated. The moment he tried to hand over his homemade paperwork, it was calmly set aside. The officials relied solely on recognized records, unpaid taxes, documented trespassing, and recorded interference with public operations. Derek, who had spent months believing that his words could rewrite reality, found himself standing against a process built on structure rather than debate. As the property was cleared, Derek noticed that even his supporters were silent in the comment sections of his live stream. They watched, expecting a dramatic standoff that never came. Instead, they saw a routine legal procedure carried out with no emotion. Derek's confident posture began to shift. He attempted to repeat his claims of sovereignty, but without an argument from the other side. His words felt different, isolated, unsupported, and without impact. The moment he had prepared for, imagining it would be a moment of triumph, was reduced to quiet compliance by those enforcing the law. When the building was officially secured, Derek was informed that all materials inside would be logged and assessed according to legal standards. His belongings, once treated by him as evidence of victory, were now simply items to be processed. The cameras he had set up continued to record, but the scene was not what his viewers expected. No dramatic confrontation, no recognition of his declared status, only the steady, measured application of established procedures. For the first time, Derek faced a situation where his refusal to acknowledge authority made no difference. The system he believed he stood outside of moved forward without hesitation, leaving no space for symbolic resistance. In the weeks that followed, Derek's online presence began to shift. His once confident broadcasts became less frequent, and when he did post, his tone had changed. The legal process moved forward slowly but firmly, powered by documentation he had ignored. Each ignored notice and each disruptive filing was organized into a case that required no confrontation to validate. Derek was not prosecuted for his beliefs, but for his clear actions occupying property without right, interfering with public offices, and refusing to follow lawful procedures. There was no dramatic showdown in court. Instead, it was a straightforward presentation of official records against his unsupported declarations. His supporters expected him to expose flaws in the system, but instead they heard about scheduled hearings, recorded evidence, and administrative consequences. Many who had once praised him began distancing themselves when they realized there was no hidden loophole or secret exemption. Derek's own recordings, which he believed would prove his independence, were used to demonstrate his consistent disregard for legal boundaries. He had built a timeline of his actions with his own hands, documenting each step not as a victory but as confirmation of his involvement. The community slowly returned to normal. The foreclosed property was restored to official control and secured for future use. The strangers who once gathered to support Derek stopped visiting, leaving behind only digital traces of their brief involvement. Local officials did not celebrate or treat the situation as a win. To them, it was simply a matter of procedure. Their goal was never to argue with Derek's personal beliefs but to maintain order through established channels. Derek, once convinced he could operate entirely outside the system, encountered a truth he had not expected. The legal framework he rejected did not require his agreement to function. It was not built on debate or personal acknowledgement but on records, process, and consistency. For all his effort to stand apart, he found himself woven into that framework through the very actions he believed made him free from it. In the end, there were no viral moments of triumph, only a quiet realization that ignoring a system does not place someone above it. Derek's story became an unspoken reminder within the community. Authority does not need to shout to be effective. Sometimes the strongest response comes not from confrontation, but from the quiet, steady reinforcement of rules that apply to everyone, regardless of what they claim to be.